think about liminal space, the space between ordinary and non-ordinary reality, ordinary and non-ordinary experience. Psilocybin, for me, is a liminal space, a very dramatic liminal space, but also prayer. The prayer that I fell through is called the Jesus prayer. It's still used in the Orthodox tradition. Some describe it as the oldest liturgical prayer. I fell through that prayer because I hadn't grown up in a church. I actually read about the prayer in a novel by J.D. Salinger. I was curious about it. I said, what would that mean? Kind of the backstory is I finished law school, studying for the bar, getting ready to take the bar. And I woke up one night, that prayer had kind of crashed through my sense of identity. And I realized, I was just bullshit. I've been in my head for these years, and I was just a bullshit person. And so I, in a quite dramatic fashion, packed my bags that morning and left the course and kind of hung out for a summer. And then finally, I didn't know what to do with that. It was a big experience, Eric. In some ways, people who are listeners who have had a psilocybin experience with no background or no context for kind of a paranormal experience, and without anybody to integrate with and nobody to talk with, and I'm kind of out there hanging around by myself thinking, if anybody knew what I was experiencing, they'd put me in an institution.
The amazing thing about the mushrooms is that they speak. They talk to you. They will answer questions, carry on conversations. Psilocybin just pulls up a chair on the porch and puts its feet up.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Psilocybin Says. I'm Eric Osborne, and you are about to listen to my conversation with Mushroom Minister Monte. Monte is also an Episcopalian minister, so there's an interesting crossover here. And he provides some really well-rounded reflections on the kind of the inclination and the importance of the mystical spiritual experience, and just a whole lot of great things in this episode. I don't want to keep my intro long. I just want to let you all get to it. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Monte. He's a really beautiful soul, and we're so grateful to have him as a part of our community, and I think you will really enjoy getting to know him too. All right, everybody, welcome back to Psilocybin Says. Monte, welcome to Psilocybin Says for the first time.
Thanks, Eric. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. I wanted to have you on because you have such a unique perspective, I think, from the non-psychedelic religious world and now dipping your toes into the psychedelic religion world. I'm really interested in kind of how these two views, these two perspectives are coming together in your personal experience, and as we've already talked about, kind of the implications of psychedelics within the religious context for broader religion. But for our audience, can you give them a little bit of a background as to your relationship with organized religion?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Again, good to be with you, and I'm interested in seeing how this unfolds in our conversation. So my in some ways, I was an accidental tourist or accidental visitor into the world of spirituality. I fell into a prayer back in the 70s that had a revolutionary effect on me. Ended up going to India and spending over about 5 years in the Indian ashram. You would think that may have been organized religion. It was in a way, but it was also in our Western model very different. So when I came back from India in the mid '80s, ended up going to a United Methodist seminary and was ordained in 1990 as a ordained United Methodist, we call elder in full connection. So then I was 25 years in active parish ministry, and all the time staying connected to my Indian roots, and have been a part of that community and watching that evolve from the very powerful experience of a very prominent guru, if you will, very extraordinary spiritual presence, and seeing how that community has in some ways devolved into authoritative religion. And then seeing how our Western capture of kind of the Jesus cult, is if you want to call it that, very ancient process, but the issues of hierarchy and power tend to seep into that organized religious environment. And I think the more interesting place is around spirituality and the explosion that we're seeing all around the world of spirituality and interest in spirituality. So, is that kind of enough context, Eric?
Yeah. Give me 2 seconds here. I got some weird kind of audio that's coming in on my side, but I want to come back to 2 things. This prayer, you said that a prayer set you off on this course towards India, and then I would love to tease out this aspect of dogma across religions. So first, back us up on how did a prayer lead you to 5 years in India?
Yeah. So I think one way we could tease this out together is to think about liminal space, the space between ordinary and non-ordinary reality, ordinary and non-ordinary experience. So psilocybin for me is a liminal space, a very dramatic liminal space, but also prayer. So the prayer that I fell through is called the Jesus prayer. It's still used in the Orthodox tradition. Some describe it as the oldest liturgical prayer used continuously. It's Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And I fell through that prayer because I hadn't grown up in a church. I actually read about the prayer in a novel by J.D. Salinger. And I was curious about it. I said, what would that mean? And I mean, kind of the backstory was I finished law school. I was studying for the bar, getting ready to take the bar. And I woke up one night, that prayer kind of crashed through my sense of identity. And I realized, I was just bullshit. You know, I've been in my head for these years, and I was just a bullshit person. And so I, in a quite dramatic fashion, packed my bags that morning and left the course and kind of hung out for a summer. And then finally, I didn't know what to do with that. It was a big experience, Eric. In some ways, people who are listeners who have had a psilocybin experience with no background or no context for kind of a paranormal experience, and without anybody to integrate with and nobody to talk with, and you know, I'm kind of out there hanging around by myself thinking, if anybody knew what I was experiencing, they'd put me in an institution. That kind of strange world of, and you know, I don't carry a real deep memory other than how, in some ways, traumatic that was, losing my grip on what I considered, you know, one-dimensional reality. When that opened up, it was, you yeah, it was a bit big of a bit of a thing. And so I in those days, I mean, right, going to bookstores now, and there's all kinds of things around self-help and religion and spirituality, and very unusual. In those days, you couldn't find that stuff. This was, in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And so I studied yoga and then heard about this teacher in the breathing community. And again, breath work, as you and I both know, is another one of those liminal space creating practices that people can go in, get into. So we in the not so much in the East Coast, but on the West Coast, we had a program or community called Rebirthing Community. So the people were doing a lot of breath work, and that kind of helped stabilize that experience I'd had with prayer and open up that whole kind of curiosity. And when I met this teacher in India, his name was Harikan Baba, just an extraordinary explosion of love, and a very kind of embodied world. Again, for listeners who've done mushrooms, one of the pass through lines for me, or kind of ways of being, is how embodying mushrooms were for me, and how embodying that world in very kind of primitive Indian ashram, bathing in cold water twice a day, up before sunup, and worshiping twice a day. Very, very interesting kind of world.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you even at that time, I mean, that was so early in this kind of new age openness. Did you always have a proclivity towards out of the box thinking, so to speak, or how did you even find yourself in kind of those kinds of communities to start? It seems so early.
Yeah, that's why I said it felt like it was accidental. It felt accidental. I mean, these things tend not to be. I think somehow we've got soul work that we don't always know about. No, I had gone through university. During Vietnam, went through. I had 4 years in the military during Vietnam. Came out, went into law school, and smoked a bit of dope because everybody did. And so no, I was a pretty straight dude. I was out of the country when I was in the military, so I wasn't kind of a part of the big hippie movement here, and so it was. I mean, in some ways, I always used to use the word, and we kind of misuse it here, but the teacher, Babaji, was incredibly seductive. The aura of love and openness and joy, just unfettered joy, of the most kind of deep humanness of him was just very alluring to me. And so and at the same time, he was a liminal experience. He dreamed into dreams, and kind of and you've experienced. I've heard you kind of tease the sense of your being with people in large gatherings or gatherings where everybody's taking mushrooms, and the field kind of opens up to you, and you have a sensibility about what's happening in the field, and that sense of a depth of knowingness. So he carried that in a big way. He carried that sense of field awareness and field caring. Yeah.
So that sounds like a non-dogmatic approach to spirituality. Where did the dogma come in with that group or that experience?
Yeah, I mean, we humans can, I mean, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, we
Yeah.
humans, though.
Yeah, yeah. So, John Calvin, one of the founders of Presbyterian, said, humans are, how do you put it? It's just like we're idle making machines, and we can turn almost anything. This ego, we just don't. I mean, the science now. I mean, we're just in an incredible, rich time. For me, where we're beginning to understand the function of the brain and how, channelized or canalized we become, and how, we just the repeating repertory of an ego and being able to capture almost any experience and turn it into a thing rather than a process or that's so. So, I mean, in some ways, that's what has happened in that Babaji community, and certainly that's happened in the Christian community. In the Christian community, we tend to turn the Bible into a literalist, right or left brain intellectual exploration. Or really, I mean, in my world, it's a compilation of extraordinary experiences. All the prophets, all the visions. I mean, most notably Ezekiel. I mean, that whole prophetic tradition, in some ways, and I say this not as an academic or anything other than a practitioner and brother on the journey. It's like, the Bible is a mushroom experience. It's a paranormal transmission, and we've turned that into a very kind of linear, left brain, rational process that we parse apart rather than can go for what it's pointing to.
Wow, yeah, that's so true, and I don't know that I've ever heard anyone express it quite like that. Especially the prophets, though. But there is so much kind of mystical, paranormal stuff in that text that we just gloss over. And here's the Ten Commandments, and here's the kind of. So is that just inevitable if humans are involved, and it's going to become a fact-driven, ego-driven? Hey, or is there a way that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're asking exactly the question that has happened, that's being asked of us right now. And Eric, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that what some describe as the dark night of the soul. I live up in Tacoma, Washington, just a few miles from Michael Meade, who is one of the foremost mythologists and kind of thinkers, bringing mythology into the present day. And, Michael is a very big voice for naming in extraordinary clear terms that, the planet itself is carrying evolution through a liminal space. And how we come out of it, let's see, it's like we're called to participate and to be co-creators in this new opportunity, but evolution itself is bigger than any of us, all of us together. It's that bigness that's wanting to emerge. And I think, the human family has had a capacity to denigrate and de-evolutionize opportunities. But there is so much going on now, even in the midst of such extraordinary pushback. But yeah, I'm hopeful that we I certainly won't see it. Maybe my grandkids, your grandkids, maybe you, but I don't see that human consciousness will reach that kind of, for lack of maybe, contemplative worldview deep enough that our systems will be revolutionized and transformed deeply enough in my lifetime. But I think that's the promise of the time that we're living.
It seems like such a daunting kind of task. It's hard to imagine what it would look like on a large scale, as we within our organization kind of try to work on this holocratic model and see the potential there and also the complications with it. Yeah, to try to imagine extrapolating that out into larger systems, society at large, because like you said, people are so, we want an idol, we want a king, as the story of David goes on to tell. And how do you feel, or what do you feel might be kind of a powerful catalyst in bringing about that? Is it just the normal course of spiritual evolution, or is this something that the evolution can be kind of catalyzed in a way through practices, perspectives, tools?
Yeah, I think you name them all. Yeah. Again, that is such I think that's such a question of the time. One thing that comes to my mind is, and it did go sideways on this, but the early Christian church was essentially a house church until it became the public religion of Rome, and all the cults and mystery traditions were quashed. Christianity thrived for 400 years, almost 400 years, in houses, catacombs, underground, basically, underground, and that you could almost say the connectivity of those small house churches is what, in some ways, empowered that first explosive embrace of Christianity, an embrace of a Christ who was loving and who people felt as being their story. And I mean, there's not an awful lot of theology done around this or understanding, but so for me, the sense of being in a story of unconditional love, where you have a Jesus, a Moses, Jesus, a Mary, and a Joseph, who are us, and we're always mindful that they are us, and that feels so different than a Jesus, or a God out there. And so, I think part of what happened, and there's, I think you're familiar with the fairly recent book on the immortality key written by, So it's really looking at the history of Christianity. And one of the theses of that book and with a lot of pretty clear physical evidence, is that the sacrament of the wine and the bread was a psychedelic substance of some nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so whatever the case, people in community were in a liminal space enough that the connectivity of those small church events or small house church events, lifted in a way, lifted spirituality in a way that it became dramatically powerful for people. And then, of course, we turned it into wars and power itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And power is also, in some ways, a deeply liminal space, but it's a dark space, isn't it? This is.
It certainly can be. I'm not sure that it has to be.
No, and I think that this is our Star Wars story that we.
Yeah. How did you go from an ashram to Episcopalian?
Oh, Methodist, yeah. I mean,
Methodist. Sorry.
Yeah, Methodists were the reform movement of the Episcopal Church. So it's an interesting thing, and I love, and thank you for inviting that out. I think in the yoga traditions, there's yogas. There's Hatha yoga, Bhakti yoga, Jnana yoga, Karma yoga. So the lineage that I was a part of and am still a part of is a Bhakti and Karma yoga lineage, and those are about service to humanity and service to God and humanity. So that got into me. I mean, it was like I was an unusual Westerner in that I was actually resident in this very small ashram, more or less permanently, until Babaji died in 1984, or took samadhi, as we say. So that that spirit of service and caring just worked its way into me. And so when I came back, and that also in that tradition area, it was never like become Hindu. It was always come here, get a sense of the taste of love, and go back and do whatever you're going to do in your own country, but carry this with you and be of service. And so ultimately, that's what I did. I helped found an ashram here down in Colorado as a part of a sanctuary for world religions in Crestone, Colorado. And part of me, and you and I have talked about it, and you're very aware of these issues around cultural appropriation. So a part of me was a bit nervous about trying to be more Hindu than I really was. And to be about a Hindu lineage that was collapsing into a more rigid, dogmatic community. And so I heard about Unity actually, which worked in the Unity prayer room for Silent Unity, and it happened. There was a Methodist seminary close by, and that's how I ended up in the Methodist Church.
Wow, that's a fascinating kind of hybridization that you represent there. One more question about the ashram. Well, in India, did it devolve into dogmatism after his passing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He it was in some ways a very extraordinarily traditional ashram in that he didn't preach, he didn't give talks, he didn't write anything, Basically, he was a spiritual presence to hang out with, and for people to feel at a vibratory level the energy of love.
Mm.
And the miracle of what that is in terms of inclusiveness and in terms of caring and service.
That's not something we have much concept for here, that an individual basically through their being can be the book, can be the teacher, just through being, not through speaking. And so there was something else that you said that I wanted to come back to. Sorry. So you've deeply studied various theologies and experienced various theologies and spiritual worldviews. And I guess one of the questions that I'm trying to explore in these conversations is, why do we have an impulse towards spirituality? And obviously everybody doesn't right now. I question kind of what's going on that maybe compels, so many people are compelled towards an atheistic perspective or a non-spiritual perspective. Atheism can be spiritual. And yet it seems like it's such an innate part of our nature. Do you have any thoughts on kind of why we are so compelled to seek liminal space, to seek mystical experiences, and like taking this outside of the context of a formalized religion?
Yeah, again, this is the I think such a wonderful question. In some ways, this is the big who am I question that we either name in that way or in some way. So my take, I think, is this. It rests on the maybe put it this way: it rests in a worldview of non-duality, where consciousness precedes matter, and the you know the name Teilhard de Chardin? 40s and 50s Jesuit and paleontologist, mystic, and he was one of the, in the West, one of the earliest to name that the consciousness that is before matter is a consciousness of love that has the attractiveness, the stickiness, the luring of love. And because the creation, or the creative process, the creation itself, the cosmos is expanding, there's an expansion of love. And so Desjardins named for the West that sense of the interconnectivity of all of life expanding itself towards love. It's a lovely thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in India, it's like I look back in India, there's the image of Indra's net, which is it's like the big spider web that connects everything. So, I think that the mystical insight, the mystical scene, or the contemplative sight, sees the the ecstasy and the love of creation that is what we're made out, what we're made from, what's woven through us. And so, yeah, I do have a story I'd share.
Sure.
About that. So,
Yeah.
and again, if we I think about liminal space and how it's like that great image of somebody, sticking their head outside the universe, or outside of physicality. So when COVID came, I did a year-long course certification on purpose guiding, and we wandered through kind of one modality of basically shamanic thinking, and it was, in some ways, it was a set for an experience where everybody went out for a whole weekend fasting and in nature. And so that particular cohort of people came back from that weekend with all kinds of wonderful experiences, and they were seated and given permission by people who had done that same course before. So it was like, I mean, I know in Peace Sanctuary there is such an appreciation for set and setting. So this was a year-long setup for people to go out in a setting of nature of their choosing and see what happened. And so I did that, and my own was, I would, you're in prayer doing mantras or whatever you do, fasting. I was out at the ocean, and it was a breezy day. I was in this little hollow, sitting, and I closed my eyes and opened my eyes. And then once I opened my eyes and I watched the grass and the wind together, and it was like the grass and the wind were making love. It was like I saw ecstasy, and it was like, oh, I can't. It was like it felt so intimate. I had to turn away. It was, but so to kind of come back to your question, I think that's what's in us.
Oh man.
Yeah, we're so trained out of seeing that.
Yeah.
But that's in us, and yeah. I mean, I think I do appreciate the Christian tradition, because I think that all of the liminal reality is named. I think that the people, we quarrel about whether the resurrection was real and whether Jesus was physically resurrected. And for me, it's like, well, yeah, that's a part of creation, death and rebirth. And this is what's going on in our bodies all the time. And how we access that. We don't have the practice. We don't have the communities. We don't have the patience and the deep listening. Yeah.
So what if that mystical realm, that place, I love that, like that, as you described, like the grass and the wind making love, like that is within us. We are seeking that out unconsciously, most of us anyway. I guess what the question that comes up for me is, why in our culture as it is, why is that the exception and not the rule? If that is, as it sounds like you're saying, and I would agree, that that's such a innate part of beingness, particularly of a human, why are 60% of the U.S. population leaving their spiritual religious communities?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not. Maybe another way to get at it is to say is to observe what we're doing instead of that.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you know that I'm connected to two other Peace Sanctuary people out here in Tacoma, Paul and Chris, and they have property, some land, undeveloped land, and part of what they are very clear about is how the land is calling them to see the land itself, to see Mother Earth herself in this particular space as the container for practice. So what we have done in the U.S. and what we have done in Western thought is what Einstein said. We honor a cult of delusion. Our delusion is that we think that our seeing of separateness and not seeing what's behind what we can see, as we don't listen to it, we don't watch for it, we don't tune into it, we don't honor it. So we have managed to to stop listening and watching and valuing the agency and the aliveness of the planet and us being a part of it. So when we move out of that world of non-duality into a world of duality and materialism and separation, then we create all these systems that ultimately, ultimately they're self-destructive, aren't they?
Yeah, well, yes. And where do you see those systems at work? Because as you say that, my initial thought process goes to our kind of our tendency to deconstruct, analyze, scientifically explore. But at the same time, I see that in modern religion as well through dogma and, that this way is the way. So like how do you see those systems? Like, is that where you see them playing out, or is it more nuanced? And then how do we remedy that?
Yeah.
Because like there's great value in science, there's great value in communal religious experience, but just as you're sharing with the ashram, it so quickly becomes dogmatic and systematized that the direct experience is almost kind of completely extracted.
Yeah.
And I don't want to obviously psychedelics are part of this conversation and they're a part of that, but they're not the only part of that breakdown.
Yeah, no. So what occurs to me is this. I think that part of what we're looking at is a whole a kind of ecology of spirituality that is kind of coming to the surface. And one big element of that spirituality is the seeing of systems theory and the systems view of life. So one of the big thinkers in our country is the physicist who wrote kind of back in the 70s, the Tao of Physics. And his work was, as a physicist, was dramatically interrupted by LSD. So he's an Austrian, came as a postdoctoral student, this is Friedrich Capra.
Okay.
That name,
No.
anyway, yeah. So Friedrich Capra is kind of one of the grandfathers of systems theory and systems thinking in this country. And again, interestingly, his a capacity to explode physics into seeing systems and seeing the reality through a lens of systems being processed rather than particles.
Mm.
So, Capras, you see now he's just a great grandfatherly guy, but he was fueled by this seeing, and then doing all of the intellectual work of creating basically a foundational text on a systems view of life, where he manages to talk about the world built from subparticle physics, biology, and chemistry through the processes of systems. Systems being processes of relationship and evolutionary emergence and growing. I mean, this is very rough layman's kind of downloading of this, but the reality for me is that when I went through college and high school, I mean, nobody talked about systems. They just weren't on our radar. And now, not only Friedrich Capra's work in California, but on the East Coast, scholars at MIT and through the Sloan Business School at MIT have created something called the Presencing Institute. And I wanted, let me land that title again, Presencing Institute. So presence in systems theory is a place of deep listening and encouraging the future to be known and heard. So the language that they use at MIT has been leading from the emerging future. Emergence being a phenomenon of systems that is in effect evolutionary, where you've got systems disrupted and experimented with, that something new, greater than the sum of the parts, can arrive and transform reality or transform a particular project. So that's kind of walking around, maybe too indirectly, but what I find hopeful, Eric, is that what we have been doing and what's being more clearly seen is what we have been doing in creating systems in government, in capitalism, in care of the environment, in extractive culture, in all of our ways of doing what we do as humans on the planet right now. All of these systems have been built on a worldview of separation and particleization in a scientific view as a legacy of the Industrial Revolution. Now all of that is wanting to flip upside down so that you get both a scientific view and a systems view of wholeness. And once we figure out how to do both of those, and then I think we're in a more sustainable mode. Right now, yeah, I mean, we're destroying the planet. We're destroying ourselves. And clearly, I mean, people have a hard time because we identify with permanence. We identify with, you know, I can walk in my bathroom and turn on my shower, turn on a light, you know, and this stuff works. I mean, it's illusion of permanence.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we how we disidentify from all of that. But again, people, I mean, there's great science going on. So I go on and on. So there must be some place to stop in there, right?
Well, I mean, it does come back to psychedelics, particularly after that, relating this physicist, and his book is called The Tao of Physics. Is that right?
Yeah, physics, yeah.
I will definitely look into that. And LSD playing a pivotal role in his perspective of physics, science, that whole world. And I guess it does bring me into question your thoughts on how psychedelics can play a role in that, maybe not system disruption, but reorienting our systems, and particularly within the religious framework.
Yeah. So I think psilocybin, mushrooms in particular, have huge promise in the Christian community, or they hold great promise in the Christian community. And I also think possibly in Judaism, in the Jewish community, and the Muslim communities. So I think there's, you know, where I see the promise is in the collaboration between science and religion, and the experimentation between science and spirituality that's being done at places like Johns Hopkins and other big hospital and universities. So for one example, I think you're familiar with the program that Johns Hopkins did with religious clergy for Christian, Jewish, and Muslim background. So that study's not going to be out until sometime later this year. But already people involved in that Johns Hopkins program process of introducing clergy to psilocybin has borne the fruit. There's a Christian network, Christian mushroom psilocybin.
Ligari.
Yeah. And also one for Jews and the Muslim community just coming up. So I find those helpful signs that there will be enough, again, kind of using that ancient pattern of house church and small interconnected groups that it's so mycelial, right? I mean, it behaves like the mushrooms behave. And again, that's that's the fun of systems. If you see that as a system and it's an interconnected, intelligent in the sense of communicating in relational reality, then I think that there is some hope. And there's also extraordinary theology emerging that even 20 years ago was not accessible as it is now. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Richard Rohr and the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque.
I know Richard Rohr's work, not in depth, but yeah.
Yeah, and his passion and his capacity to articulate the contemplative mind, and Jesus is the universal and the universal Christ. Another religious, Ilvia Dilio, she's I think she's a Franciscan nun, or anyway, she's a scholar, religious, doing work on bringing Teilhard de Chardin's theology into kind of 2024 language. So yeah, there are these hot places here, also in Europe. Europe's much, in some ways, much looser dogmatically than we are already. So yeah, I think that there's hope in the interconnectivity and the conversations. Like I think this podcast you do is a valuable part of a conversation. People have a chance to listen, maybe go back and listen again, and have a sense that, oh yeah, there is a larger reality wanting to happen. And the question is, how do I become a part of it? How do I serve them? Yeah.
So a couple things come up for me. First, I guess I want to ask, when you share these thoughts within your network, if you are, and I'm assuming that you are sharing at least some of your perspective around psychedelics and the intersect of Christianity, Islam, etc., like how is that received? And then kind of after that, I'd love to explore, does a scientific understanding of spirituality through, as we're studying the synapses and mystical states induced by psychedelics, does that detract from the kind of the felt experience if it just becomes a biochemical process? But so first, how are you being received in the communities where you're sharing this?
It's interesting. So, I self-identify myself as a coach, as a life and leadership coach, and so I'm entering these spaces, even in churches. As a couple of months ago, I started getting a call to do some preaching, which I hadn't done in 10 years, and. So I didn't talk about mushrooms, but I did bring a bigger expanded sense of the gospel, and it was well received. When I talk about mushrooms with clergy I know, there's pretty big interest. So Chris and Poe and I are going to visit a church up in Seattle in August or September and do a presentation on psilocybin and possibilities of how the church wants to be asking questions. How do we catch up? How do we prepare ourselves for participation in this larger conversation of spirituality that is happening, that includes in a very public way now the toolbox of psychedelics. So you call it my particular test model in churches is very small. So, I listen to people who are doing the Christian network, and one of the women scholars who did the Johns Hopkins study or process is now publishing papers and speaking all over the country about this, and especially in the healing space. So this is something else that we haven't got to or won't get to today, but that whole intersection of psilocybin, spirituality, and healing and curing. I mean,
I would love for us to touch on that. So it's there's a pin in my head on that topic. So
yeah. And the other thing that I would kind of, offer and sharing is that in the coaching space, Eric, while mushrooms are not so much talked about, the worldview of mushrooms, of non-duality, of synchronicity, of systems emerging that can be felt into those, that's happening in the executive coaching world, which is surprising me, but incredible amount of crossover now in the corporate world, because I mean, not everybody running corporations is dumb. There are a lot of smart people, and people see, especially in the insurance industry. I mean, we cannot insure ourselves into safety any longer. I mean, you can't buy insurance in some parts of the country. Some parts of the country, like even because of fire in Colorado, our ashram had its insurance canceled because of fire. Now we're paying, $10,000 more a year just to get insurance. I mean, people see that, and people see that we are in an unsustainable arc of development.
No.
And so people are reaching out, and they're reaching out, through contemplative practices, mindfulness. I mean, it's really an explosion. And so you touch on a very interesting thing, and I don't know that if you wanted to pursue this, but if people objectify mushrooms and turn mushrooms into a can of beer, as it were, so without the integration and the sense of being a part of community. I mean, this is the stuff that you're trying to weave into Peace Sanctuary, and I know it's frustrating. I know that it's challenging, but those are the questions that I hear others asking and trying to get their heads around as well.
Well, it's challenging in that the vast majority of the conversation around psilocybin has been a materialistic medical conversation, and my belief is that this is primarily a mystical spiritual experience. Now, that can be, as I was suggesting, it can be quantified in ways. We can get to a kind of scientific understanding of the mystical experience, and I'm not sure if that takes away or contributes to the conversation. I think it probably contributes, and I have a real fascination in this kind of where the material and immaterial worlds kind of come together. But as you're speaking, what really is coming up for me is our potential to idolize the mushroom, to turn it into an outside source of revelation, when even from the biochemical process, what seems to be happening is we are becoming more aware of our inner world. And so how do we prevent the mushroom from becoming the idol or the guru, and let people really understand that it's just providing access to themselves?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, isn't that a question around set and setting?
Well, and the big setting of the culture, right, is how I see it.
Yeah, I think that the first is a great question, and I so appreciate that you're asking that in such a serious way, and I other than, I mean, my first kind of sense is if the mindset and worldview isn't challenged wherever you're at on your journey, if you're going into ceremony with mushrooms, and your worldview isn't somehow allowed to be challenged and softened, wherever you're at in your journey, that mindset needs to be fluid and flexible. It's interesting. In the last Sunday's service, the reading from the Tao Te Ching was around softness. I don't know if you remember. Yeah. So I think that's a so even a mindset, if we call it just a mindset, speaks of the danger. If it's set and not in that land of paradox already, before taking mushrooms, we want to challenge ourselves a bit. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And
It's go ahead.
And then I think the other part is I mean, if you put it, I think is setting, and this is one of the things that we here at Tacoma really, it's like we're not shamans, but we are. I mean, one way that I talk to myself about it is that we're called into being shamans, to activating primitive shamanistic awareness with the land itself, where the rocks, the trees, the grass, all the stuff of the earth becomes accessible as a partner and collaborator in the listening. And that also that this is done in community. So we're pretty clear that offering solo journeys to initiate people into community is not a particularly healthy, great choice. And the medical model, I mean, even look at the Johns Hopkins webpage, like I did yesterday, we got one person stretched out on a couch with blinders on inside with a blanket in the dark room. And how do you in that context, in that setting, dive into that deeper place of the mycelial connection of rocks, trees, land, dirt, water, bushes, shrubs, and also people in community who are trying to get into a similar bandwidth of deep listening, where that can be experientially fertilized or cross-fertilized in ways that you don't know it. I mean, and so one of the people I work with out here is a scientist, and he's a great fan of the mystical index that has been, it has been put together. And I just say, it's lovely, but hanging out with Babaji, this is a much more complex thing that we have no way to even measure.
Right.
We do not have language for it.
Right.
And we run into it with mushrooms. It's just like, oh. And if you think about it, yeah.
I always laugh at the mystical index.
Yeah. It's like, dude, really? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you feel a sense of connectivity? Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I have a belief that every single psilocybin, I feel very strongly that every single psilocybin experience is a mystical experience, but very often they don't fit into that description that we have of a mystical experience. I mean, someone sweating and like, imagine the worst, most uncomfortable psilocybin experience you can, you know, convulsing, sweating, vomiting for hours. And I've seen this on occasion, and I still classify that as a mystical experience. And then there's reasons why that I won't go into, but it's just, yeah, it's kind of ludicrous to me that we try to describe the indescribable, particularly with checklists.
Yeah. I say amen to that, because I think it gets down to, it's like, oh, the medicine didn't work.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, I totally agree that the breadth and depth of our connection with psilocybin and mushrooms. I mean, for one thing, there are different strains. I mean, and this is not a world I know. I won't know only by name, but there are different strains and different potencies in the mushroom world. That it's a refined pharmacology that we just have no appreciation. And to try to kind of co-opt that into our culture of consumer categories. Yeah, I mean,
Well, what you're bridging there is, I feel like, a really important topic that we do touch on, and that is the relationship of mental health and spirituality. So many people, even within Sanctuary, it's really challenging at times that no matter how much we talk about this as a sacrament and a spiritual experience, it is, a certain percentage of people are going to continue to come back to this as a mental health treatment. And that's where their mindset is around it. And it's not to say that it's not. I mean, obviously it can be. But my belief is that's kind of secondary in nature. And I'm just like, as it relates to more, I want to say traditional, but maybe not, because I'm also including your experience in India in this. But where have you seen, or how have you seen spirituality in and of itself, devoid of any chemical compounds, impact mental health?
so yeah, my take is, I think, pretty close to yours. I make the distinction between healing and curing, and mind, body, and spirit integrated, and challenging the whole category of mental illness. And in some ways, I almost prefer emotional illiteracy better. That so one thing. So one of the things I was initiated in when I was in India is an ancient practice called jara, and it's done with mantras, a mantra, and peacock feathers. So person lies on their back, I'm sitting up and sweeping their aura with peacock feathers, reciting the mantra.
I had a dream of peacock feathers last night. That is so wild that you're talking about this.
There you go.
Go ahead.
This is our mycelial connection, man. So I have So I've over the years I've offered that to people as a healing, understanding for myself that healing is more about reconciliation and coming back to ourselves and feeling connected to ourselves in a way that we didn't feel before the healing process engaged us.
Mm-hmm.
We felt somehow disembodied, disengaged, disassociated, and healing somehow works. And again, I'm not claiming to be a healer so much as a practitioner. I practice.
Mm-hmm.
So the language will be imprecise, and others will have much better access to it. But that healing of people that I have witnessed is people say, "Oh, actually, I'm okay with this now." Oh, okay, it doesn't bother. I get that this is not a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in the world of trauma, it's like one of the things that trauma is likened to is ice. It's like ice in us. And healing is the melting of that ice. And it's that letting go. It's like, oh. And in the contemplative world, deep contemplative access is a big letting go. Like when I had that experience with prayer back in the 70s, when I woke up during the middle of the night, I could smell myself detoxifying. My whole I stunk. I could smell myself, smell like death. So so that's kind of a wild world of healing. And I liked it to be wild because it really is so situational to people, to where they are, and to put it in a pathologizing medical model where you're thinking that cure is the only thing without the deeper mind, body, spirit integration and reconciliation and letting go into your bigger space and into your purpose. Yeah. That makes sense? Probably not.
No, it does. It does very much so. I'm not entirely, I guess, I would like for people to have, how do I want to say this? So the letting go that you're talking about, the relaxing into, the softening, even as the Tao was talking about, can be so much a part of the experience with psilocybin. I guess where I'm getting a little bit hung up here is that I want to find a way to help people break free from this kind of strictly biochemical model that we have, right? Like we think right now, which it's flawed from the start, in my opinion, because all of our focus is on the brain, when, as I was reading yesterday, the majority of the serotonin receptors, which is what psilocybin is active on, are outside of the brain. They're outside of the central nervous system, as a matter of fact, right? And so I don't see this as purely a biochemical process, and I think that most people do. And I just wonder if there's kind of more of a direct connection between the religious experience and healing. And I love how you're talking about this, what you said, emotional literacy, and not pathologizing neurodivergency or, the different ways that we all work. Because you referenced the prophets of the Old Testament. Those guys are batshit crazy by modern standards, right? So how do we, in a modern world where so much emphasis is put on this physical understanding, biochemical understanding, how do we kind of transition or synthesize those two worlds if we do it all? Does that make sense? Just wanted to share with the audience a little more direct connection between spiritual practice and the outcomes from the psychedelic experience.
Yeah, I think I think that's the realm of experimentation, and I would dare say that, yeah, getting people to take off their shoes and walk out in nature would be a big part of that.
Mm-hmm.
With the instruction of, come back and tell me what the tree or some part of the landscape said to you.
Mm.
Come back and tell me what you saw that you hadn't seen before when you took that same walk. Come back and tell me how many birds you could identify, and if one of the birds was talking to you. I think part of what we're dealing with is our we're orphans from our home in Mother Nature. And to get ourselves landed back in nature, and to feel the joy that really is a non-linear. It's like I go out and work in my garden, dig in my garden, I come back and it's like, oh, I'm feeling whole in ways that I didn't even notice how it landed, but I come back inside and it's there. Mm-hmm. So I think that so that would be one thing that I think would be a helpful thing to experiment with. And I think the other thing is again, in the Eastern world, there is this word satsang, spiritual conversation. And I think spiritual conversation, intentional spiritual conversation in circle with others is, and again, unfortunately, Eric, people are measuring this, but that's okay. But I think spiritual conversation in circles that are self-designed and self-directed as learning circles with each other, where you're disrupting that centering on me and my health and how poorly I'm doing and how this society is telling me. So if I can get into, and I love 12-step groups, but again, I think they can become idolized. Mm-hmm. You idolize that 12-step experience. So, and you're in a bubble of experience. So if you get people who are dissimilar, who by their nature are a bit disruptive with each other, not in an emotionally entangled way, but just because of what they carry into the circle, and people commit to being in those circles. And I think that's one of the things that the Peace Sanctuary and you might, I think you're already, you play with that because you've got these circles, these learning places going on. I know the IFS circle. I mean, that's important stuff. Mm-hmm. So yeah, walking in nature, being in nature, learning circles, satsangs, and I mean, the other thing that I don't know how we do this, but deconstructing Christianity for people. I wasn't raised in a church, so for me, deconstructing some of that has been easier. I've got other, other childhood trauma that I deal with, but I think if we could allow ourselves to say that Western religion, as it's been transmitted, has been basically a power-driven trauma in people, and that we're duty-bound to deconstruct that for ourselves. I think that also helps deconstruct those other rigid models of medicalization and pathologizing.
Yeah, I mean, we've turned myth into fact, right? And so, like, from there. But what I really appreciate about what you said from the outset there is the experimentation. And in my head, I'm hearing it's experiment with the unknown, right? Experiment in the unknown, whether that's people and perspectives that you are not familiar with, whether it is the natural world in a way that you're not familiar with. And in particular, as it relates to the mushroom, what I heard you saying, or how I interpreted what you were saying, is to stop using the mushroom as a tool to stop using the mushroom or looking at the mushroom as a treatment for your malady, and use the mushroom as a tool to experience reality in a deeper way. And it's through experiencing reality and all, like what you said, like how many times can you walk down the same path and see it in a certain way, and then through a shift in perspective, be it breath work, mantras, mushrooms, whatever it is, and all of a sudden it opens up a whole new world to you that can completely change your worldview. I mean, the birds themselves have become, like, I understand birds in a way that is very different than how I was brought up to understand them, because of working with the mushroom, and how that then modifies my worldview and how I relate to all these parts of my worldview is profound beyond any descriptions. So yeah, I think those are some wonderful ways to kind of get outside of the box, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on 90 minutes here. This has been a very fast, wonderful conversation, Monte. Every time I talk with you, I'm just blown away with your heart, your curiosity, how you just explore this world, and now hearing even more of kind of your diverse background and who you are. It just gives me so much more appreciation for what you bring to conversations and the presence that you bring in. Before we go out, I would love to ask you the question that we ask everybody. What does psilocybin say to you?
Yeah, I think it's like there's love and connection in everything. And I think there's also like there is maybe a please listen.
Oh, wow. Oh, God. Man, you brought listening up a couple of times here in this conversation, and I feel like that is it's a realm. It's not just a skill. Like, listening is almost a dimension in itself. If you go out and you start listening to the birds, or in a conversation, if we're actively listening, and yeah, psilocybin says so many times, it's like, and that even I had an experience 2 days ago, and that was such a big part of it, was listen to the trees, listen to the breeze, listen to the space around you. That's beautiful. Well, thank you, Monte. Thank you for all that you have done in your life to advance these perspectives and grow your own perspective. And thank you for everything that you bring to Sanctuary and to this podcast now.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's great. It's a great joy. I'm grateful to be having this time with you.
Likewise, my friend. Likewise. All right. Well, I guess until the next time, we'll call this conversation for the day, and I look forward to our next one.
Me too. Be well.